Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lasok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commands and commands us to engross ourselves in words of Torah. All right, now, tonight we're going to look at the beginning of this southern campaign. Actually, it was a beginning in the and almost the end in one, but we'll look at the first part of it right here in chapter 10 and the first 15 verses. And basically it's the battle of the five kings. And so let's go ahead and read this. Now it came to pass that Adoni-zedek, king of Jerusalem, heard that Joshua had taken Ai and had utterly destroyed it, just as he had done to Jericho and its king. So he had done to Ai and its king, that the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and remained among them. So he feared greatly, because Gibeon was a large city, as one of the royal cities, in fact, larger than Ai, and all its men were mighty. So what we see here, here's a picture of a map, so that you kind of get a feel for where Gibeon was. It's not a viable town now today, but the ruins are still there, and you can see over here where Jericho was, and then just here off of the J of Jericho is Gilgal, and that's where the Israelites are camped out, and they're that's kind of their headquarters now until they capture more land. But anyway, that's what Gibeon looks like today. It's kind of terraced, and a lot of those terraces are where the archaeologists have been playing in the sand pile there, and looking at stuff. And then, of course, there's a city on the back side of that. But that's what Gibeon looks like today. Now, this guy, the king of Jerusalem, Adoni-zedek, his name supposedly meant "my Lord is righteous," or it could have been "my Lord is the name Zedek." I don't really go with the deal about "my Lord is Zedek." I think it's more like "my Lord is righteous," and it could also have been the title of the king of Jerusalem. You remember that during Abraham's time, there was a king of Jerusalem, or of Salem, as it was called back then. So this was several hundred years earlier. He was Melchizedek, and Melech-tzedek, the king of righteousness. So this could very well have been just a carry on from that. We don't really know, but we do know that he was really an enemy of Israel. He was afraid of them. Of course, he's kind of he wanted to maintain the status quo, maintain his power. Obviously, he did not want to be outside of Jerusalem and not be the king. So he feared them, and he feared them enough. It feared Israel enough to actually combine or ally himself with the other city-states in the region, the other four that we'll see in a minute, and make an alliance with them. Whereas normally he probably would view them with as much suspicion as he did with Israel. Only they'd had a status quo there, so they really weren't fighting each other at that point. But now they were allied with each other to go against Israel. Now, The verses in there talked about being utterly destroyed, where talked about Jericho and Ai being utterly destroyed. Well, what that means, being utterly destroyed, we learned in previous lessons that the Hebrew word is harem, and that means to be devoted to God. So God was taking that of Jericho being utterly destroyed. That was God's portion. So everything in Jericho was dedicated to him. And the only thing that was, they took all the gold and silver and the bronze pots and pans and metals and so forth, and that became that then belonged to the tabernacle and the service of the tabernacle, and then everything else was destroyed, burned as a sacrifice to the Lord. So let's go on. Any questions on that so far, or comments that you might have? Okay, so in verses 3 and 4, therefore Adoni-zedek, king of Jerusalem, sent word to Hoham, king of Hebron, Piram, king of Jarmuth, Japhia, king of Lachish, and Debir, king of Eglon. Now, these guys, they had each one of these things had these kings had a name that was significant, and for instance, the king Debir, that actually means a speaker or orator, and the name Debir is similar to Devar, which is to speak, and so the other kings also had similar names that, taken together, just gave a character to the people of Canaan that was basically against Israel. And even this guy Adoni-zedek, he's kind of a type of an antichrist, as it were. And so they came up. He went to this guy from Jerusalem, Adoni-zedek, went to the other kings and said, "Come on up, help me, and let's attack Gibeon," because he had heard that Gibeon. The Gibeonites had made peace with Joshua and Bnei Israel, and so at that point, okay, had they made peace with them? Did that mean they were going to be allies so that they would then go and fight the rest of Canaan? And the Bible says that Gibeon was full of valiant men. I mean, they had a lot of warriors, and we do know that they were not afraid to go out and fight. So anyway, that's these specific names that were given actually lend an authenticity to the story, because these were names that could be traced back if and when they find the proper documentation for it. The little clay tablets that seem to pop up now and then, and they could come up with these names. Now, Gibeon, it said it was a royal city, meaning it kind of belonged, I guess, to one of these kings, but we don't really know. And but it did not have a king itself. Gibeon did not have a king. They were governed by some other form, but it was larger than the city of Ai, and so therefore they would have had lots of soldiers. So this guy Hoham, who says, "Who Adonai impels." Now that means that he was supposedly he was a strong leader, and he pushed people into religion. and Piram, the meaning there was wild ass. And as we know that that was the prophecy over Ishmael, was that he would be a wild ass. And so a lot of times people in in the modern world look at that and say, "Oh, that's a terrible thing to tell somebody that they're this wild ass." But what that was is that was an animal, that was a creature back in those days that basically was a wild, kind of like our wild Mustangs of today out in the western United States, where these guys were they were good with their hooves and their teeth, and so they could fight their enemies, whatever, jackals or lions or bears. Oh my! And they were strong. They were free. I mean, it was not a bad thing to be called a wild ass. So I'm not going to make any jokes about that. All right, and Joram was showing himself, and he was kind of narcissistic. He was a guy that he put himself first all the time. He was more of a selfish kind of guy. And then, like I'd spoken with De Beer, as being a speaker, and so putting all these guys together is kind of a picture of somebody that they were kind of against against Israel, and of course all of them wanted to maintain their own power, so they had a vested interest in going up against Israel. So so the five kings of the Amorites, so this group here: the king of Jerusalem, Adoni-zedek; the king of Hebron; the king of Jarmuth; the king of Lachish; and the king of Eglon. They gathered themselves up together with and all of their armies and everything, and they camped out around Gibeon and attacked it. So Gibeon was a walled city, and so they laid siege to the city. And somehow the men of Gibeon got word out to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said, "Hey, don't abandon your servants. Remember, you made a peace treaty with us. Come up to us quickly and save us. Help us, for all the kings of the Amorites living in the hill country have gathered against us." All right. Now, here's one of those cases, we talked about it before, about how the Bible says, it's got a lot of hyperbole in it, the way the writing style, where they would say, "and all of the people did this," or "all of the people did that," or whatever. And meaning, like we would say, "Yeah, we had a party and man, everybody was there." So you know that, okay, what does everybody mean? Well, it means that there were just a lot of people there. And so here they say that all the five kings of the Amorites. Well, in this case, yeah, that was who there were. There were all of the five kings. They came up against Israel. So, and here is the map of where these kings were from: Hebron and Lachish and Eglon and Jarmuth, and these guys came up from there. And of course, Jebus was the ancient name for Jerusalem, or another name for Jerusalem. So they came up against. They all went up there and look at the furthest one away was only about 30 miles. That's not a lot of mileage for us today, but back in those days, 30 miles was a good long ways, and especially in the terrain of Israel, that it would have taken a while to get up there with their armies under normal circumstances in 2 or 3 days. And so they gathered up against Gibeon up here. Now, The Amorites, they were one of about 7 of the 7 nations that were to be destroyed. And you remember that Moses had come up against, actually Joshua as a much younger man had fought against the kings of Og and Sihon, and they were they were on the other side of the Jordan though, and so they'd already been defeated by Israel, and now their east or their west bank counterparts were going to be coming up against Israel. Now this treaty that Gibeon had somehow come into covenant with Israel and Joshua evidently then required Joshua to protect them. And if it was a standard suzerain treaty, then yes, the conqueror had a responsibility to protect those that he had conquered, and they were to protect them from foreign invasion. So here, the Gibeonites, it didn't take them very long to call in their chips with their masters, as it were, with Israel, that, hey, you made a covenant with us, now you got to come and protect us. So there you go. That's what happens when you make these unauthorized treaties. So Joshua went up to from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him, and all the mighty men of valor. Now Adonai said to Joshua, "Do not fear them, for I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will stand before you." All right, now Joshua left Gilgal, and he left with all of his best troops and everything. They were ready for war. These people had tasted victory, and they were looking for some more because it was lucrative. They were able to get a lot of a lot of booty and riches and so forth from the people that they'd conquered. And so it's Adonai had told Joshua, says, "Do not fear them, do not fear." Now, that's the same thing that Moses had told the children of Israel when the spies had come back and they were ready to go in the land. He says, "Don't be afraid. You can do this." And of course, children of Israel blew it because they definitely, they didn't go into the land. They then they tried to go into the land and got roundly defeated. And so, these words "do not fear" kind of harkens back to a sadder time. But this time, God said, "No one will stand against you." And so, this is reminiscent of the promise that God made to Joshua in the first chapter in verse 5. All right. Now, let's go on ahead. Are there any questions or comments so far on this lesson? Okay. In Joshua 10:9 and 10, so Joshua came up upon them suddenly by marching all night from Gilgal. Adonai threw them into confusion before Israel, defeated them with a crushing defeat at Gibeon, chased them by the road that goes up to Beth Horon, and struck them as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And however you massacre those, that was word massacre there. Azekah, and Makkedah or Makkedah, I don't know, but that's where they chased them from. Now, so we see that. Let's get this. Joshua you'll learn in the next verses there, or no, in these verses that he got up and he did something that he was kind of want to do. He was a surprise attacker. He liked to do something a little bit unconventional and go against what the people, what the normal warrior would do, to throw his enemies off guard, to um, so that they would be off balance and then they could attack. And that's what he did. He took his troops at night and they marched 20 miles with nothing but the moonlight over their head. And it was a full moon, but it would have still been a very difficult trek to go up and over the mountains with 40,000 troops or however many it was that they had, and do all of this at night. It's about 20 miles, and it's all uphill, seems like, because they were coming from Gilgal, which is down at the on the Jordan River. So it's still, I forget the elevation there at Gilgal, but then to go from there up um, to Gibeon would have been, several hundred feet climb up there, and to do it at night, pretty gutsy maneuver. The object, of course, was a surprise attack against the five kings. And we know that he used surprise and just unconventional ways of doing things against the soldiers at Ai. And then later on, you'll see that same sort of surprise attack at a city called Hatzor. And I really enjoy the Hatzor thing. I've been there and was just fascinated by the idea that she could still see the burn marks where Joshua had burned the city down. So verses and okay, 7 and 8. What did I do? Did I not put 1, 9 and 10? Best troops. Okay, now I'm behind myself here. So verses verse 11. Now I want to comment a little bit more on the 9 and 10. There were some other things. It said Adonai threw the enemy into confusion, that they were all just confused. And really and truly what happened here in this battle, like in the battle at Jericho, the warrior was God. He's the one that fought the battle. He confused the enemy. We'll see later on in our studies in Judges and the Kings and Samuel and so forth, where they would come against, if you remember Gideon, that he was going up against the Philistines, and God had thrown them in such a turmoil that they ended up killing each other somehow. And so he threw these guys into just a confusion. And so they were already kind of in a mess before Israel actually got to them. So Joshua 10 and 11 says, while they were fleeing before Israel down the descent of Beth Horon, Adonai cast down great stones from heaven on them all the way to Azekah. So they died. More of them died from the hailstones than those Bnei Israel killed with the sword. So here is this first miracle of the battle, I guess, In fact, even before my notes there, the first miracle was the confusion that God sowed among the enemy. That they were um, in such a state. Now, this is early in the morning, and maybe even during the night. There were times in the Bible where the enemy heard the sound of lots of feet coming at them, and it was just God over in the in the sidelines, with his angelic hosts, and they were all marching along and creating a big stir of sound, and it scared the people. They thought that they were overrun, and then they actually, in the confusion, um, the fog of battle, and maybe just some divine fog, they killed off each other, and so here I think we're seeing some of the same kind of a thing. That then God sent these hailstones, giant hailstones, and it said that it killed more people than the Israelites were able to do with their sword. So incredible thing. You think hail. I mean, what's that? But let's look at something here. This is the the largest hail that we know of. I mean, that's been reported that I could find was about 8 inches in diameter. Well, 8 inches in diameter. Okay, if you can see on the camera, is a sphere about this big, and it would weigh about 2 pounds. So if it drops out of the sky, depending on how high the cloud cover was and all that kind of stuff, but they calculate that a 2-pound hailstone that's 8 inches in diameter, this big, could reach over 106 miles per hour before it hit the ground or hit whatever it was going to hit. Now you can see on here the size of these hailstones and how they had busted out. These hailstones had broken out the back window of this vehicle. Big holes. And then you see this guy here who was beat up by hailstones. And anyway, that's what that is purported to be. It doesn't look very good either way. What either the hailstones or some other kind of thing that was going on with this dude. And there's a picture of pretty good size hailstone, and kind of interesting. I always considered hailstones as perfectly round, or some a round thing, not with all those sharp edges sticking out. But that's some that hit. I think it was up in Montana, Wyoming, someplace up there. That this thing was about 8 inches across, and it would weigh about 2 pounds. So there's some interesting stuff here. In the Bible, in Revelation, it talks about how that God is going to send hailstones on the non-believers, the unbelievers, and that they would weigh over 100 pounds. Now, based on an 8-inch hailstone being 2 pounds, then how big would a 100-pound hailstone be? I don't know if can anybody work that out in your head? Let's see. I think it would be that the hailstone, 100-pound hailstone, would be 14.7451. inches in diameter, give or take. And that's a 15-inch, like that, yeah, about a 15-inch hailstone. That'd be 100 pounds. And you can believe that if you've ever picked up a full block of ice, a 50-pound block of ice. Back in the old days, younger people will not ever remember this, but we used to go. There were places called ice houses, and you could go and buy a 50-pound block of ice, stick it in your cooler, and then you go out and work in the fields, and that was your, that's what kept your food or your water cold, and so anyway, those 50-pound block was, I don't know, something like that. I mean, it was maybe a little bit bigger. To a kid, I mean, it seemed like it was about this big, And of course, I couldn't, back in those days, I couldn't pick up a 50-pound block of ice, but a 100-pound hailstone would be about 15 inches in diameter, and that's what they said will be falling on the unbelievers. So, not a good time to be a non-believer in the tribulation times. Anybody got a comment or a question? Make sure all you got to do is hit that mute button down on the bottom. I think it should be on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen, perhaps, maybe. So anyway, it's on the end of that black bar. Okay, so going ahead with our reading, in verse 12 says, "Then Joshua spoke to Adonai on the day Adonai gave the Amorites over to Bnei Israel, and said in the eyes of Israel, Sun, stand still over Gibeon, moon over the Ajalon Valley." All right, so there's a couple of things here. In a way, it's kind of unclear who is speaking what words when. You go back up there, is it God or is it Joshua? Then Joshua spoke to Adonai on the day that Adonai gave the Amorites over to Bnei Israel, and said in the eyes of Israel. Okay, in English, it's a little bit more plain that it would be Joshua. In the Hebrew, it was not. But a couple of things to look at. It says, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon over the Ajalon Valley." Now, for the sun to be over here on one horizon and the moon to be on the western horizon, that would mean that it was early morning in the middle of the week. In the middle of the month, and so you would see normally that day for the people of Canaan would indicate a day that is a long day, and it would indicate a day that you didn't want to go into battle, because remember, back in those days, a lot of people had these superstitions and so forth about everything, seems like. And of course, today, in today's world, we don't do that, because we never walk under ladders, or what happens when the black cat walks in front of you, or if you break a mirror in 7 years of bad luck. Oh my! And all of those kind of things. If you were a sailor, you even had more superstitions. And so forth. So, you don't ever, you wouldn't have a woman on your ship. Now, that's an old sailorism. You just don't put, women don't go to sea, and because that would be bad luck. And so I've let everybody know that I am definitely not superstitious, because that's just bad luck. All right, so Any comments or questions so far on how we're going here? So what was interesting was that these hailstones that had come down had killed more people than any of the Israelites had killed the people. I mean, they basically, God was wiping out this army, and so then Joshua prays, stop the sun and the moon, give us more daylight so that we can go ahead and take care of these guys, because if it gets dark they'll be able to slip off in the night, and we won't be able to dispatch as many as we would like. So in Joshua 13 and 14 it says, so the sun stood still and the moon stopped until the nation took vengeance on its enemies. Now, is it not written in the book of Jashar? Thus the sun halted in the middle of the sky and did not hurry to go down for about a full day. There was no day like that before it or after it. And when Adonai listened to the voice, is a day that when Adonai listened to the voice of a man, and then for Adonai fought for Israel. There's a lot of stuff in these two verses. Now, let's talk about this business of the sun standing still. Now, I don't know how many of you are one of these kind that you get into the Bible and everything that you read in the Bible, you want to just go to look at it and go, yeah, right. That could never happen. Or if you are feeling like that, I wonder why you're in this class tonight. But anyway, or you could be the other guy that says, well, I don't understand any of this stuff. I don't know what's going on. But I would say that, generally I'm going to go along with the Bible. So, and then, some people are saying, yeah, whatever the Bible says, that's it. And there's no room for debate and so forth. And there's a lot of stuff that the Bible doesn't say. So they have to make some assumptions. And then the assumptions become golden in their view. So, I kind of like to take a little bit of a middle approach, as it were, so that I'm able to examine things and not get so dogmatic about it that then you end up arguing and being ugly with people. And shoot, I can't afford to be any uglier than I am. So just try to be a little bit accommodating. Now, there's several views of the sun standing still. There's a literal translation of, the earth, moon, sun, the whole universe, and everything just stopped, moving in the sky, and everything just stopped. And the idea that this could not have happened, I beg to differ. God created all this stuff. He can certainly, throw up the divine whistle and blow the whistle and everything stop. That's not out of the realm of possibility. But, a lot of times things happen that have natural causes. And, there was a guy that came to one of our famous rabbis and was talking about how that the crossing of the Red Sea was such a time that there was an extreme tide that basically dried up this path across the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds. And so, but it was just a natural phenomenon that they had a drought right there, or not a tidal change right there. And then this old rabbi got excited. He says, "Oh, isn't that just great?" He said that the whole idea that God now, He made this high tide or low tide, or whichever one it was, just at the right time for Israel to cross over. And so he said, he accepted that was just as big a miracle, even if it was a natural cause. And same with the children of Israel crossing the Jordan. I said, well, there was an earthquake 8 miles above, and that's where, the water was shut off there at that point. There again, there's the miracle in it that God caused that to happen right when Israel needed to get across the flood stages of the Jordan River, and it worked out quite well. So, going on. Said so. There are other translations of what the sun standing still meant. There's a literal translation that the earth, the moon, the sun, all of this stuff stopped moving in the sky. And there you go. It could have happened. It really, really, really could have happened. But most everybody says, I was reading a commentary today, and it says, but we know, that the earth and moon, the stars, and everything did not stop. So therefore, we can just reject that. Well, it's kind of like global warming guys today. They just because they say something doesn't mean that that's exactly the way it should be, or that's the way it is. Now, there's also the figurative translation here. What they're saying is that this could have been poetic language that it even says, isn't this stuff, aren't all these facts and everything recorded in the book of Jasher? So what they are telling here could very well have been Israeli poetry, but that doesn't explain everything. Now the next there's a couple of explanations that for this, the sun standing still and so forth. And again, it would require that there was poetic language involved, but the cultural explanation was of it that the people of Canaan were very superstitious, and so they even had many more superstitions than we do today, and one of them was the length of they had days lined up as to what. Okay, this is a lucky day. This is an unlucky day. This is a meh day. So this day, right smack in the middle of the month, where you had a full moon that went over. It's over there in the west. You got the sun over here in the east. Then they conjured up perhaps that, okay, this is a bad day to go into battle because you got both the sun and the moon watching us, so it would be best not to go into battle. Well, we don't know whether that Joshua was aware of these customs. Perhaps he was, but for whatever reason, or maybe just God told him, "Hey, everybody get up, saddle up, and head up here to Gibeon at night, and we're going to go up at night. We're going to get everything ready to go. We're going to attack these people, and at the break of dawn, we're going to be out there against these people." So they said it could have been a bad omen day for the Canaanites, for all these Amorites, as it were, and that so that when Joshua showed up and he's got his army there, and they're looking at it and says, "Oh no, this is not a good day for us to battle. If we battle, we're certainly going to lose." And then on top of all of that, then the other part of an explanation comes along. People said that they have figured out that there was a solar eclipse on that day. And a solar eclipse only lasts at the max, a full total eclipse of the sun lasts 7.29 minutes, basically 7.5 minutes. And so that 7.5 minutes would not have been enough time to sway a battle one way or the other. They've been raging all day long. And so what the scholars are postulating perhaps is that this this omen of it being the sun on one side and the moon on the other side. That particular day was not one of their good days for battle. Uh, and then on top of that, then you've got an eclipse that turns the sky dark. Oh boy, that's another uh, reason why this would not be a propitious day to attack Israel or to have to fight with Israel. So both of those things combined, plus there's Hebrew language there that talks about the the sun stopping, and then that same word could mean that it was also silent or dark, or um, you know Hebrew is such an economic language that it has to be taken in context, and sometimes in context even it's very difficult to figure out what is trying to be said. So um, thus it says the sun halted. Okay, the sun halted in the middle of the sky and did not hurry down for about a full day. There was no day like that before or after it, when Adonai listened to the voice of a man, for Adonai fought for Israel. Then Joshua and all Israel with him returned to the camp at Gilgal. All right, now I think that the remarkable thing about this whole thing, that the Bible actually even specifies and says it in here, is that God listened to a man and he did what he asked him to do. Well, you know what? God does that all the time, really. I mean, what about our prayers? When we pray in our congregation in Katy, I could not actually tell you how many people have come to me and said, I need a job. I'm out of work. I need a job. So we pray for them, and in the next day or two, they'll call me up and says, I can't believe it. Good, just wow. I'm surprised, but I just got a job, and it's a real good job. And so, um, you know, I always ask people, well, why would you be surprised, or why does this shock you that we pray for you, and God answers your prayers? So God does. I mean, He answers our prayers. But for Joshua to get up there in the middle of everybody in Israel and said, "Okay, sun stop, moon stop, and soldiers start," and here he is telling that the sun's going to stop, and the moon is going to stop, and all of that kind of stuff. Uh, that's pretty gutsy to get up there and say, yeah, that we're going to do this, and God's going to do it for us. And sure enough, that's exactly the way it turned out to be. And even the Bible acknowledges that here Joshua said something, and God did it exactly like He had said for him to do. So, but the Bible does say that Adonai fought for Israel, and I think that is probably the key concept of chapter 10, is that um, God was the warrior. He was the divine warrior. He did more. He killed more. He confused more. He did all of these things much, much more than did the um, Israelites. So really, and it's kind of kind of like when sometimes you let a kid sit in your lap and drive. Well, of course, at the same time, you're kind of trying to steer a little bit, and he says, "Yeah, I drove all the way down the driveway." Well, yeah, not really. And so God is saying, um, He's doing some of these things now. All right, now I got some. Okay, yeah, there's some comments here. Yeah, that whoever CNC Chuck is said, I just believe this stuff. Is that Charles Mulnickle? Because Charles,
Yes, sir.
that's okay. I gotcha. Hey, you got more emails than Carter had teeth. You know it. So, so anyway, um, the Bible says that there was not another day like that. Never had been where the God listened to the voice of a man and did exactly that. And I'd have to say, yeah, there's probably never been another day. Now, what did all this stuff with the sun stopping and all that? How did it happen? I don't know. I can personally believe that God shut everything down and just said, okay, everything stop. All right. And then everything go. And, he's not bound by the laws of physics. And he said, okay, stop the earth. I want to get off. If all of a sudden you stop the earth, everything would be destroyed on the earth because it would, basically you'd just fly off everywhere because you can't, we've got momentum built up and, the earth is what, 12,000 mile diameter or something. Somebody that can remember that stuff. I can't remember how big the Earth is. But you stand out on the outside of that thing, and even though we're traveling, if it stopped immediately, boom, man, you'd go flying everywhere. So, can I believe that God did all that? Absolutely, I can believe that. It's can I explain it? Nope. I'm not going to even try because other people have already done all that kind of explaining, and they don't really have an answer. They just said, well, it could be this and it could be that, and a lot of their answers are just plain goofy anyway. Because they don't want to believe in a miracle. They always have to come up with some kind of a natural phenomenon that would preclude them from having to believe in an all powerful God that can do miracles by just speaking them into existence. And I would imagine he could think them into existence, and they don't like to believe that sort of stuff. So they come up with all these stories as to explanations as to why it could be that way. So, now, one other thing I wanted to bring out is this book of Jasher. I've mentioned to several people, okay, the book of Jasher is non canon, okay, and no scroll or bit or piece, there's not a jot or a tittle of the book of Jasher that has ever been found. Now, some guy back in 1849 said he found the ancient manuscripts for the book of Jasher in a depository library in Brigham Young University in Salt Lake City. Uh-huh. Okay. So that's about how much trust and faith I put into the book of Jasher. But I know in certain circles that book of Jasher is held up and venerated as being an authoritative source. I personally do not believe it is. So certainly, I've got a book. I've got the book of Jasher someplace on one of my bookshelves, and I've read through the thing. But at the same time, I just would tell you, maybe for an interesting read to put you to sleep at night or something like that. But certainly do not try to build any kind of doctrine on the book of Jasher. The book of Enoch, 1 or 2 or 3, or all of those other extra biblical things. Don't try to build doctrine on that. Okay. So, and then all these other things, the last point that I wanted to make is that no matter, there are no real good explanations for this sun and moon stopping. My best deal is that, you know what, God could do it, maybe there is a combination of some of these other natural phenomena, but I don't have any problem at all just saying, yep, the God that I serve can certainly do those kind of things. And so Israel, they finished this off, and then they went down to went back to Gilgal. That was their headquarters. Now they said that returning to Gilgal, they were going back for a bit of rest and recuperation. R&R after an all-night march and then an all-day battle. Now, the following verses in here, 16 through 28, talking about the execution of the 5 kings, that they, that's kind of a parenthetical that it says, oh yeah, then they executed these kings, then they went back to recuperation.
My name's in one of them 5 kings.
Huh?
Oh, sorry. I said my name is one of those 5 kings. I didn't know you were unmuted.
Yeah, you're not muted, so he unmuted you. But so there's a kind of a parenthetical. It's not the only place that there are parentheticals, so there's really not a problem with the idea of saying that. Oh yeah, they went back to Gilgal, and then oh yeah, there's another part in here about before they went back to Gilgal, then they went back to Gilgal. So it's not a real problem with me as far as the veracity of the text. So all right, that is all of it for tonight. And are there any comments, questions, or anything that you might have on everything that we did tonight?
I can't think of any.
Okay. Yeah, this was I thought about pulling in some of that stuff that every so often you'll get a story about some NASA engineer that couldn't figure out some kind of a schedule for the moon and stars and so forth. So he got on his computer and he figured out how that the sun was stopped, and they were behind. They were just lost a half a day, and so then he pulled out his old trusty Bible and looked at it and said, "Oh, hi, here's my half a day," because what did the Bible say? Yeah, that it was for a period of about half a day. But the problem with that is that the guys supposedly that had done that, NASA says, well, that's great, but we have no project logged in that would have been calculating that. Plus, we don't have an engineer by that name. And I read about this thing 20 years ago. And so it's been circulating even before there was an internet about that. It's a great story, but I don't need a scientist to try to prove to me that something in the Bible is true. It's nice when they can come up with corroborating evidence, but